At the peak of her career, Dr. Naomi West, a renowned and resilient surgeon, has built a life defined by precision, dedication, and a deep love for her family. But late one night, her world begins to unravel when she receives an anonymous call that chills her to the bone. Resign, or your family will pay the price. At first, Naomi believes it could be a cruel prank, a meaningless threat meant to rattle her. But when life-threatening accidents start to happen in the operating room, monitors failing, machines malfunctioning, it becomes clear that someone inside the hospital is targeting her. As the pressure mounts, Naomi is forced to question everything: her colleagues, her friends, and even herself. With her reputation at stake and her family's safety on the line, Naomi must navigate a maze of sabotage, betrayal, and fear to uncover the truth. Who is pulling the strings, and why? Could the person she trusts most be the one determined to destroy her? And when the enemy's life falls into her hands, will Naomi have the strength to face them head-on? Dr. Naomi West sat in her office as the hands of the clock edged past midnight. The sterile air of the hospital carried the faint hum of machines and distant footsteps. Naomi sighed, rubbing her temple as she reviewed her final case notes for the evening. The weight of a long day sat heavily on her shoulders. Naomi was one of the most respected surgeons at Parkside Medical Center. She had earned her reputation through years of grueling work, late nights, and a fierce determination that set her apart. Her patients trusted her. Her colleagues admired her. Yet, there were moments like tonight when exhaustion felt like an ever-tightening knot in her chest. The night shift always had a particular kind of loneliness to it. The large hospital, usually buzzing with people, grew quiet. Hallways stretched long and empty. The silence allowed Naomi's mind to wander, back to her family waiting at home. Her husband, Marcus, would have already tucked their two children, Lily and Isaiah, into bed. Naomi pictured their small house, modest but warm, with its walls adorned with crayon drawings and family photos. Marcus would have left a plate of food for her on the stove, knowing she would come home late. She smiled faintly at the thought of him, steady and patient, always the calm to her storm. Naomi grabbed her bag, shrugged into her coat, and pushed through the double doors leading to the parking lot. Her steps echoed in the cold night air. Her silver sedan sat alone under the dim yellow glow of a street lamp. Naomi climbed in, her fingers stiff against the cold steering wheel. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights flickered as she passed by dark storefronts and quiet neighborhoods. Naomi's mind drifted. She thought of Lily's wide smile and Isaiah's bright curiosity, both of which reminded her why she pushed so hard. Every long shift, every sacrifice it was for them. Pulling into her driveway, Naomi exhaled deeply. The small white house with its blue shutters felt like a sanctuary. Light spilled from the living room window, and Naomi could make out Marcus on the couch, reading a book. The sight warmed her. The front door creaked softly as she stepped inside. The smell of Marcus's cooking greeted her: fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. Naomi felt her stomach rumble. "Hey, you," Marcus said, looking up from the couch. His smile was soft, and his eyes held that familiar mix of pride and concern. "Hey," Naomi replied, setting her bag down. She walked over to him and leaned into his hug, the tension in her body finally easing. "Long night?" he asked gently. "The usual," she said, her voice tired but steady. "How were the kids?" "Perfect," Marcus said with a chuckle. "Lily is already planning her next science fair project, and Isaiah made me promise we would play catch tomorrow." Naomi grinned. "I will make it up to them this weekend, I promise." Marcus kissed her forehead. "I know you will. Sit. Eat. I saved you a plate." As Naomi sat at the kitchen table and ate, the weight of her day began to lift. These were the moments that made it all worth it. The quiet love of her family. The sense of being home. It was nearly 1:30 a.m. when Naomi finally climbed into bed beside Marcus. His breathing was steady, already deep in sleep. Naomi stared at the ceiling, her thoughts swirling. She tried to shake the feeling of unease that had clung to her all night. Maybe it was just the fatigue. The sound of her cell phone ringing shattered the quiet. Naomi jerked upright, fumbling for her phone on the nightstand. The screen read, "Unknown caller." Her heart quickened. "Hello?" she whispered, trying not to wake Marcus. At first, there was silence. Naomi's breath caught. Then a low, distorted voice spoke. "Leave the hospital, Dr. West. Resign, or your family will pay the price." Naomi froze. The voice was cold and deliberate. It sent a shiver down her spine. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite herself. "You have been warned," the voice replied. The line went dead. Naomi stared at the screen, her hand shaking slightly. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she turned to look at Marcus, who was still asleep beside her. She felt a strange mix of panic and disbelief. It had to be a prank. Someone had called the wrong number, but deep down, something told her this was real. Naomi climbed out of bed and moved to the kitchen, where she stood in the dark, staring at her phone. She replayed the call in her mind, the voice echoing like a shadow. What did they mean by resign? Who would say such a thing, and why? Naomi leaned against the counter, gripping the edge. Fear swelled in her chest, followed quickly by anger. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles to be bullied into quitting. Whoever this was, they were trying to scare her, and it was working. But she would not let them win. The rest of the night passed slowly. Naomi sat in the living room, unable to sleep, jumping at every sound outside. The first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains as Lily padded into the room in her pajamas. "Mom, you are awake already?" Naomi forced a smile, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "Just an early start, baby. How did you sleep?" "Good," Lily said, resting her head against Naomi's shoulder. "You smell like Dad's cooking." Naomi laughed softly. For a moment, the call felt like a bad dream. Marcus walked into the living room, rubbing his eyes. "You are up early. Everything okay?" "Yeah," Naomi said quickly. "Just could not sleep." She kissed Lily on the forehead and stood up. "I need to get to the hospital. Early start." Marcus frowned. "You sure you are okay?" "I am fine," Naomi said with a smile that felt heavy. "Take care of the kids for me." Naomi arrived at the hospital as the world began to wake. The usual morning chaos greeted her, doctors rushing to rounds, nurses exchanging updates, patients arriving for appointments. Naomi slipped into her routine, burying herself in work. But the call stayed with her. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt. She found herself scanning the hallways and parking lot for anyone suspicious. Her colleagues seemed oblivious, but Naomi felt like she was walking through a fog. At lunch, Ethan Moore stopped by her table. Ethan was tall, wiry, and wore the kind of easy smile that put people at ease. He and Naomi had been friends since her first year at Parkside. "You look like you have not slept," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. Naomi shrugged. "Rough night." "You okay?" "Yeah, just tired," Naomi replied, forcing a smile. Ethan studied her for a moment before nodding. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." "Thanks, Ethan," Naomi said, genuinely touched. She watched him leave, grateful for his presence, but unwilling to share her fears. How could she explain something so strange and terrifying? By the end of the day, Naomi was drained. She felt like a rubber band stretched too thin. As she walked to her car in the dimly lit parking lot, she glanced over her shoulder. The lot was nearly empty, but Naomi could not shake the feeling that someone was watching her. She climbed into her car and locked the doors, gripping the steering wheel tightly. As she pulled out, she spotted a black sedan parked near the exit. Its headlights flicked on as she passed, and the car pulled out behind her. Naomi's hands tightened on the wheel as she drove home. The car stayed a few lengths behind her the entire way. When she turned onto her street, the black sedan slowed and disappeared into the distance. Naomi parked her car and sat in the driveway, her pulse racing. The fear she had been holding back finally spilled over. Someone was following her, and whoever it was, they meant what they said. Naomi barely slept. The darkness of her bedroom, once a safe space, felt suffocating. Every creak of the house made her heart pound. The black sedan from the night before haunted her thoughts. Were they watching her? Would they act on their threat? The memory of that chilling voice, low and deliberate, wrapped around her like icy chains. Morning sunlight crept in, thin and gray through the curtains. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee in her trembling hands. Across from her, Marcus read the paper while Isaiah and Lily ate their cereal, giggling over a silly joke between them. The sound of their laughter was bittersweet. It brought her comfort, but also tightened the knot of fear in her stomach. "You are quiet this morning," Marcus said, folding the paper. His brow furrowed as he looked at her. "Everything okay?" Naomi forced a smile. "Just tired, that's all. It was a long shift yesterday." Marcus frowned. "You know, Naomi, you don't always have to be so strong. I can tell something's on your mind." She hesitated, her eyes flicking to the kids. Lily was now dancing her spoon around like it was a rocket ship, while Isaiah slurped the last of his milk. Naomi couldn't bring herself to tell Marcus. What could she even say? That someone threatened their family because of her job. That the car last night might mean they were being followed. She shook her head and stood. "I'll be fine. I have an early surgery today. Can you drop the kids off at school?" "Of course," Marcus replied, still watching her closely. He knew her too well. "Naomi, if you—" "I'm fine," she said, her tone a little sharper than she intended. She kissed his cheek quickly, murmuring an apology. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll call you later." At Parkside Medical Center, Naomi slipped back into her familiar rhythm, hoping work would distract her. It didn't. As she entered the main hallway, everything felt slightly off-kilter. She scanned the faces of her colleagues. No one seemed out of place, but Naomi couldn't shake the paranoia that gnawed at her. Was someone here watching her? Had the person who called her been among them all along? The hospital bustled as usual, nurses pushing carts, surgeons in scrubs trading case notes, phones ringing in the distance. Naomi passed Dr. Ethan Moore in the hallway. "Morning, Naomi," he called. Waving, she managed to smile, but her mind was elsewhere. By mid-morning, Naomi was in surgery, scrubbing in for a difficult procedure, a triple bypass. It was high-risk and time-consuming, but Naomi was a master of her craft. This was where she felt most confident, most in control. "Dr. West, the patient's prepped and ready," said Kelly, the nurse assisting her today. "Thank you," Naomi replied, slipping on her gloves. The operating room felt cool, the lights bright. Naomi focused on her breathing, steadying herself as she entered the sterile space. This was her sanctuary. The hum of machines, the soft beep of the heart monitor, all of it became white noise in the background as Naomi centered herself. The procedure began smoothly. Naomi's hands moved with practiced precision, each motion deliberate and confident. The team worked seamlessly around her, responding to her instructions. It was as though the outside world ceased to exist here, beyond these sterile walls. But then something happened. "Doctor," Kelly's voice cut through the quiet. "The ventilator." Naomi's head snapped up. The heart monitor began to spike erratically. The ventilator flickered, the air pressure dropping, the patient's vitals plummeted. "Ventilator's failing," Kelly shouted. Naomi's blood ran cold, but she forced her mind to stay sharp. Her hands were still inside the patient's open chest, the heart beating weakly. Panic threatened to take over, but she fought it back with sheer will. "Bag him manually, now!" Naomi barked, her voice sharp and clear. A nurse grabbed the ambu bag and began pumping oxygen into the patient's lungs, while Kelly scrambled to stabilize the machine. The ventilator alarm blared, an insistent, high-pitched wail. Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears. She focused solely on keeping the patient alive. Suction here good. Clamp now. I need more pressure on the left artery. Stay with me, everyone. Her team moved like clockwork, responding to Naomi's calm leadership. After what felt like hours, but was really just minutes, the ventilator resumed function. The patient's heart rhythm steadied. The team exhaled collectively, but Naomi stayed frozen for a second longer. She removed her gloves with trembling fingers, her mask damp from sweat. "Good work, team," she said finally, her voice tight. "Let's close." After the surgery, Naomi stood in the scrub room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. She knew that ventilator failure had not been an accident. Someone did this. "Dr. West?" A soft voice broke her thoughts. Naomi turned to see Kelly, the nurse who had assisted her. Kelly was younger, with a kind face and steady hands. She offered Naomi a small, worried smile. "Are you okay, doctor?" Kelly asked gently. Naomi hesitated before answering. "It was close today." "It was," Kelly agreed, her voice soft but steady. "But you handled it. You always do." Naomi looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in Kelly's tone. "I've been here 5 years," Kelly continued, stepping closer. "And I've seen surgeons break under pressure. But you are calm even when the world is falling apart. It's why I trust you. We all do." Naomi's throat tightened unexpectedly. The simple kindness in Kelly's words caught her off guard, like a ray of light through storm clouds. "Thank you," Naomi whispered, managing a faint smile. Kelly nodded, then stepped out of the room, leaving Naomi alone. She turned back to the mirror. The reflection that stared back was still Naomi West, but something had shifted inside her. The threats, the failure in the OR, someone wanted her to doubt herself, to fall apart. But Kelly's quiet faith reminded her of who she was. She would not break. That evening, Naomi sat in her car in the nearly empty hospital parking lot, staring into the darkness. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. For a second she froze, her heart pounding. When she picked it up, she saw it was Marcus. She exhaled deeply and answered. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "You okay?" Marcus asked. "You sound off." "I'm just tired," Naomi replied, glancing in her rearview mirror. The lot was still, but shadows played tricks on her eyes. "I'm heading home now." "You want me to come get you?" Marcus offered, his voice filled with concern. "No," Naomi said firmly. "I'll be fine." "Drive safe, Naomi. I love you." "I love you too." She ended the call and started the engine. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she checked her mirrors again. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, in the corner of her eye, she saw it, a black sedan parked near the entrance. Her hands tightened on the wheel as she drove away, her thoughts racing. The threats were real. The malfunction in surgery was real. Whoever was behind this was not going to stop. But neither would she. The drive home felt longer than usual. Naomi's knuckles were white against the steering wheel as she checked her mirrors every few minutes. The black sedan was nowhere to be seen, but the lingering paranoia had burrowed deep into her chest. Her mind cycled through the events of the day. The threatening call, the ventilator failure in surgery, and Kelly's unexpected reassurance. "Someone wants me to fall apart." The thought sat heavy in her gut. Naomi pulled into the driveway, the warm glow of her small house waiting for her like a beacon. For a moment, she let herself sit there, hands still on the wheel, staring at the light spilling out from the living room window. Inside, Marcus was helping Lily with her school project at the dining table. Sheets of paper, colored pencils, and glue sticks were scattered everywhere. Isaiah sat on the floor nearby, building a fort out of couch cushions. The sight made Naomi's chest ache. This was her sanctuary, her home. Whoever was behind the threats wanted to take this away from her. "Mom!" Isaiah's voice broke her thoughts as he jumped up and ran to hug her. Naomi knelt, holding him close as if she could shield him from whatever darkness lingered outside. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, her voice soft. Marcus looked up from Lily's project, his expression a mix of relief and concern. "You're late again." "Long day," Naomi said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her hands still trembled slightly, but she hid them by holding Isaiah's hand. "What are you two working on?" Lily grinned and held up a poster board covered in planets and shiny stars. "My science fair project. I picked the solar system." "It looks amazing," Naomi said, forcing warmth into her voice. She kissed the top of Lily's head. "You're going to win first place, I know it." "Mom, you need to help me with the big one," Lily said earnestly. "The sun. It's huge, and I can't get it right." Naomi smiled faintly. "We'll work on it this weekend, I promise." As the kids returned to their activities, Marcus came to stand beside her. He studied her face. "You're shaking." Naomi's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Marcus cupped her elbow, guiding her toward the kitchen where they could talk privately. "Naomi," he said softly, his dark eyes holding hers. "What is going on?" She hesitated. The words hovered on her lips, but she couldn't push them out. How could she tell him? That someone had sabotaged her in the OR? That their family might be in danger? Marcus would insist on calling the police, and she wasn't ready for that. Not yet. "Just a tough surgery," she lied finally, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I was on edge today, nothing more." Marcus didn't look convinced. "You've been acting strange for days now." "I'm just tired," Naomi replied quickly, squeezing his hand. "Really, I'll be fine." "Naomi, I promise," she cut him off gently. "Let's just get through this week, okay?" Marcus studied her for another moment before nodding reluctantly. "Okay, but I'm here, Naomi. If you need to tell me something, I'm here." "I know," she whispered, and for a moment she allowed herself to lean into his strength. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The events of yesterday were still sharp in her memory. The ventilator failure, the heart-stopping moments when she thought she would lose her patient. She couldn't let that happen again. She pushed through the double doors into the operating wing. The staff greeted her with smiles and nods, as if nothing had changed. Naomi forced herself to act natural, but every face she passed raised a small flicker of suspicion in her mind. Could it be someone here? She tried to push the thought aside as she stopped by the surgical coordinator's desk. Today's schedule was packed. 2 routine gallbladder removals, a complex bowel resection, and a consultation for a heart transplant candidate. Naomi scanned the list, her focus sharp. "Good morning, Dr. West." Ethan Moore's familiar voice called from behind her. Naomi turned to see her colleague approaching, his scrubs already wrinkled. Ethan was holding a clipboard and his usual thermos of coffee. His easy smile was in place, but Naomi noticed his eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than normal. "You're here early," he said casually, leaning against the counter. "Long list today," Naomi replied, careful to keep her tone light. Ethan sipped his coffee. "You seemed off yesterday. I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," Naomi said quickly, feeling her shoulders tense. "Just a rough surgery. Happens to all of us." Ethan studied her for a moment. "If you need to talk, I'm around." "Thanks, Ethan," Naomi said, forcing a polite smile before heading off down the hallway. Ethan was her closest friend at the hospital. They had worked together for years, and Naomi had trusted him with many things. But now, even his kindness left her uneasy. She couldn't shake the paranoia that followed her like a shadow. By mid-afternoon, Naomi found herself back in surgery for a routine bowel resection. Her hands moved with their usual confidence, her mind sharp as she guided her team. "Kelly, suction here. Perfect. Dr. Patel, clamp that artery for me," she instructed. Her team moved seamlessly around her. For a while, Naomi's focus overpowered her lingering fear. This was her craft, her purpose. Nothing else mattered here but the patient and the skill in her hands. Then it happened again. The lights flickered. A sharp beep rang out from one of the monitors. Naomi froze mid-motion, her scalpel poised over the patient's abdomen. "Vitals are dropping." Kelly's voice rose slightly in alarm. Naomi's heart pounded as she scanned the equipment. One of the monitors was flatlining, though the patient's pulse was still strong. "It's the monitor," Naomi said sharply, her voice cutting through the panic. "Check the leads and get me a replacement stat." A nurse rushed to swap out the malfunctioning machine. Naomi exhaled slowly, willing herself to stay calm as she resumed the procedure. Minutes passed, and the patient stabilized. Naomi finished the surgery without further incident, but inside she was seething. Once again, the equipment had failed. This isn't a coincidence. As she scrubbed out after surgery, Naomi's hands shook with anger. She turned sharply to Kelly, who was waiting nearby. "Did anyone check this equipment before the procedure?" Naomi demanded. Kelly looked startled, but nodded quickly. "Yes, doctor. Everything was fine during the pre-op check." "Get me the maintenance logs for this machine," Naomi said. Her voice was firm but calm. Kelly hesitated. "I'll see what I can do, Dr. West." Naomi studied Kelly's face for any hint of deception, but there was none. The young nurse had been steady under pressure, and Naomi didn't think she was lying. As Naomi dried her hands, her anger turned to resolve. Someone was tampering with her equipment. Someone wanted her to fail, to doubt herself. But they had underestimated her. That evening, Naomi sat in her office, staring at the blank maintenance report Kelly had slipped to her hours earlier. There were missing entries weeks where machines hadn't been logged or checked. The sabotage was deliberate. A knock at the door broke her focus. It was Kelly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," Kelly said softly, placing a cup on Naomi's desk. Naomi looked up, her chest softening slightly at the small act of kindness. "Thank you, Kelly. I mean it." Kelly smiled. "You're welcome, doctor." She paused before adding, "Whatever's going on, you'll get through it. You always do." Naomi stared at the young nurse for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you," she said again, her voice quieter. As Kelly left, Naomi sat alone in the dim light of her office. The sabotage was real. The threats were real. But for the first time in days, Naomi felt a flicker of strength return to her. Whoever was behind this had made a mistake. They thought they could break her, but they had no idea who they were up against. Naomi sat alone in her office long after the last light had dimmed in the hallways of Parkside Medical Center. The maintenance logs sat in front of her, their glaring omissions confirming her worst fears. Someone inside the hospital had tampered with the equipment. She stared at the blank spots in the record, her mind racing. Weeks unaccounted for. Machines that had supposedly been checked but clearly hadn't. It wasn't just negligence, it was sabotage. Someone wanted her to doubt herself, to lose her footing, and now it was clear they were getting bolder. Naomi leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her body, but her mind refused to stop. Her gaze fell on the family photo she kept on her desk. Marcus had his arms around her, Lily sat proudly on her knee, and little Isaiah was grinning from ear to ear. She traced her finger along the glass, her chest tightening. Whoever was behind this had threatened them, her family, the people she loved most in the world. It wasn't just about her career anymore, it was about protecting her home. The knock at her office door startled her. Naomi straightened and cleared her throat before answering. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Ethan stepped inside, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked disheveled, his scrubs wrinkled, but his familiar, easy smile was there. "I thought you might need this," he said, holding out one of the cups. Naomi hesitated, but accepted the drink. The warmth of the cup against her palm was oddly comforting. "Late night, huh?" Ethan said, settling into the chair across from her. He studied her face, his expression softer now. "You've been pushing yourself hard, Naomi." "I'm fine," she replied, the words automatic. "You keep saying that, but I don't believe you." Ethan's tone was light, but there was an edge of seriousness beneath it. "You've been tense for days now. What's going on?" Naomi hesitated. Ethan had been her closest friend at the hospital for years. They had worked together on countless cases, saving lives side by side. But something about the last few days had eroded her ability to trust anyone. "Nothing," she said finally. "Just the usual stress." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "If you say so, but you know you can tell me anything, right?" Naomi nodded, forcing a small smile. "Thanks, Ethan." He lingered for a moment longer before standing and taking a final sip of his coffee. "Get some rest tonight, Naomi. You look like you haven't slept in days." She watched him leave, a knot of unease curling in her stomach. Ethan's kindness should have reassured her, but instead, it unsettled her further. It wasn't Ethan himself, at least not yet, but the fact that she no longer knew who she could trust. Naomi arrived home late, the house quiet and dark, except for the faint glow of the kitchen light. Marcus was waiting for her at the table, his laptop open in front of him. He looked up when she walked in, relief flooding his features. "You're home," he said softly. "I was starting to worry." "Sorry," Naomi replied, setting her bag on the counter. "Things ran late at the hospital." Marcus closed his laptop and pushed his chair back, studying her closely. "Naomi, sit down for a minute." She hesitated but joined him at the table, suddenly feeling the weight of the day settle over her. Marcus reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I don't want to push, but something's going on. I can see it. You've been distant, Naomi, on edge." Naomi looked away, blinking quickly to keep her emotions at bay. She couldn't keep lying to him. Marcus had always been her rock, her safe place when everything else fell apart. "There's something I need to tell you," she said quietly. Marcus straightened, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "What is it?" Naomi took a shaky breath. "Someone called me a few nights ago. They threatened me, threatened you and the kids." The words hung in the air like a weight. Marcus's expression darkened immediately. "What?" "They told me to resign from the hospital," Naomi continued. "Then yesterday, there was an equipment failure during surgery. It wasn't an accident. Someone is trying to sabotage me." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Naomi, why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to worry you," she said, her voice trembling. You thought you could handle this on your own," Marcus interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. He stopped pacing and turned to face her. "We need to call the police." Naomi shook her head quickly. "I can't. Not yet. If we call them and this person finds out, they might escalate. I need time to figure out who's behind this." "Naomi." "Please, Marcus," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm not giving in to whoever this is, but I need to handle this carefully for you, for the kids." Marcus sighed deeply, running a hand over his face before sitting down again. "Okay, but if this gets worse, we're calling the police. No arguments." Naomi nodded, relief flooding her. "Okay." Marcus reached for her hand again, his voice softening. "Naomi, we're in this together. You're not alone." Her throat tightened. "Thank you." The sound of footsteps on the stairs made them both turn. Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing?" "Just talking, sweetie," Marcus said quickly, forcing a smile. "Go back to bed." Lily nodded, yawning, and padded back up the stairs. Naomi watched her go, her heart twisting painfully. Whoever was behind this didn't just threaten her job, they threatened her family, and Naomi would do anything to keep them safe. The next morning, Naomi drove to the hospital with renewed focus. She parked in her usual spot, but scanned the lot carefully, before getting out of her car. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Inside, the day passed in a blur of patient rounds and consultations. Naomi moved through her schedule with her usual efficiency, but her mind remained sharp, alert to every detail. By mid-afternoon, she stopped by the maintenance office, her request for equipment logs still lingering unanswered. The office was empty except for Greg, one of the janitors, who was sorting through supplies. "Dr. West?" Greg looked up, surprised to see her. "Something I can help you with?" Naomi hesitated, then stepped inside. Greg had been working at Parkside for years. He was quiet but dependable, always there in the background. "Greg, do you know who's been logging the equipment checks lately?" Greg frowned, wiping his hands on his pants. "Last I heard, it's supposed to be Harold from engineering, but he's been out sick for weeks." Naomi felt a chill crawl up her spine. "And no one's taken over for him?" Greg shook his head. "Not that I know of. I've seen some of the logs sitting around, though. I figured someone would catch up eventually." "Where are they?" Naomi asked sharply. Greg motioned to a stack of papers sitting on the corner desk. Naomi sifted through them quickly, her hands trembling. The logs were incomplete, disorganized, and barely checked. Greg watched her for a moment before speaking. "You know, Dr. West, my wife still talks about how you saved her life. A few years ago during her gallbladder surgery. She says you're a miracle worker." Naomi paused, her throat tightening. "She's doing well now?" "Better than ever," Greg said with a small smile. "You do good work here, doctor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Naomi stared at him for a moment, caught off guard by the quiet sincerity of his words. "Thank you, Greg," she said softly. Greg nodded and returned to his task, but his words stayed with her as she walked back to her office. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Naomi sat down. The incomplete logs spread in front of her. Someone was trying to sabotage her, someone within these very walls, but she wasn't going to let them win. Not now. Not ever. Naomi stared at the stack of incomplete maintenance logs spread out on her desk. The disarray, the gaps, each blank space, confirmed her worst fears. Someone was inside the hospital, tampering with the equipment. The threat was deliberate, methodical, and close. Greg's words echoed in her mind. "You do good work here, doctor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was the first glimmer of reassurance Naomi had felt in days, but it was quickly swallowed by the grim realization that someone wanted to destroy everything she had built. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly as her thoughts raced. She knew she couldn't keep this quiet much longer, but without proof, real proof, the administration would write this off as paranoia or coincidence. Worse, they could turn against her. Her phone buzzed on the desk, startling her. She snatched it up, her pulse spiking when she saw "unknown caller" on the screen. Her hand trembled as she answered. "Hello?" For a few seconds, there was silence. Then the same low, distorted voice from the first call came through. "You didn't listen, Dr. Westy. Resign, or next time, someone will die." The line went dead. Naomi's heart pounded painfully in her chest as she stared at the phone. The silence that followed was deafening. She gripped the edge of her desk to steady herself. Her body was shaking, but her resolve hardened. Whoever this was, they were escalating. Naomi couldn't let this go on. Later that morning, Naomi pushed through the hospital's glass doors, her mind a storm of emotions. As she moved down the hallway, her eyes flickered to every person she passed: nurses, technicians, other doctors, all familiar faces. Yet now, they felt like masks hiding something darker. Who could it be? Her instincts pointed her toward two people, Ethan Moore and Dr. Maya Bennett. Both were close to her work. Both had access to the operating room, and both had reasons, however weak, to undermine her. Ethan's recent concern suddenly felt too well-timed, too rehearsed. And Maya had been distant lately, almost dismissive. Naomi spotted Ethan at the coffee cart near the nurse's station. His easy smile was firmly in place as he laughed with one of the residents. Watching him, Naomi felt a pang of guilt for even suspecting him. Ethan had been her friend for years, but friends could lie. She approached him, masking her suspicion with a faint smile. "Morning, Ethan." Ethan turned to her, his grin warm. "Naomi, you look better today. I'm glad to see it." "Thanks," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "You got a minute?" "Sure," Ethan said, his brow furrowing slightly. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, I need a favor," Naomi said carefully. "I need you to help me double-check something. I think there's been a problem with the maintenance records for some of the equipment. Can you help me dig into it?" Ethan looked surprised, but he nodded. "Of course. What are you looking for?" "I'll explain later," Naomi said quickly. "Just keep this between us, okay?" "Of course," Ethan repeated, his smile faltering slightly. "You know I've got your back, Naomi." "Thanks," she said, forcing a smile before walking away. As she moved down the hallway, she felt Ethan's eyes lingering on her back. Her stomach tightened. Maybe she was imagining it, but something in his expression had shifted. By early afternoon, Naomi found herself on the second floor, standing outside Maya Bennett's office. Maya was brilliant, ambitious, and meticulous. She had always been a tough competitor, though Naomi never let herself see Maya as anything more than a colleague. Naomi knocked once, and a sharp, "Come in," followed. Maya was sitting at her desk, her sharp features framed by her neat ponytail. Her desk, as always, was immaculate, every pen in place, every paper filed. Maya barely looked up from the computer. "Dr. West," Maya said, her tone even. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need to talk to you," Naomi said carefully, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Maya raised an eyebrow, finally looking at her. "This sounds serious." "It is." Naomi hesitated for a second before continuing. "There's been a pattern of equipment failures. First the ventilator, then a monitor. Someone is tampering with the machines." Maya blinked, her expression unreadable. "You're serious." "I wouldn't bring this to you if I wasn't," Naomi said, watching her closely. "I think someone's trying to sabotage me." For a moment, Maya was silent. Then she sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Why are you telling me this, Naomi?" Naomi frowned. "Because I think it could be someone close to the OR. You've been quiet lately, distant." Maya's expression darkened. "You think it's me?" "No," Naomi said quickly. "I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening, and I need to trust someone. You know the OR as well as I do. If you've noticed anything strange, anything at all, I need to know." Maya stared at her for a long moment, her sharp eyes unblinking. Then she exhaled and looked away. "I didn't think it was important, but—" "But what?" Naomi asked, her voice tightening. "I noticed Ethan in the OR late at night last week," Maya said. "I asked him what he was doing, and he said he was checking some things for a case. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but—" She trailed off, meeting Naomi's eyes. "If someone's tampering with the equipment, maybe you should ask him." Naomi felt her stomach drop. "Ethan?" she repeated quietly. "I'm not saying it's him," Maya replied. "But you asked me if I noticed anything. That's what I saw." Naomi nodded slowly, her mind spinning. Ethan? The friend she had trusted for years. Could he really be involved? "Thanks, Maya," Naomi said softly. Maya nodded. "Be careful, Naomi." By the end of the day, Naomi felt like a live wire tightly coiled, ready to snap. The hospital felt less like a safe place and more like a maze filled with shadows and unseen threats. She sat in her office as the evening sun bled through the window. Her phone buzzed on the desk. She glanced down, her heart leaping when she saw Marcus's name. She answered quickly. "Hey, hey," Marcus replied. His voice was calm, a balm against her frayed nerves. "Are you coming home soon? The kids are asking for you." Naomi smiled faintly, the image of Lily and Isaiah softening the hard edges of her day. I'll be home soon. I just have to finish something up. Okay, Marcus said, his tone gentle. Drive safe, Naomi. I love you. I love you too. When she hung up, Naomi sat back and stared at the ceiling. Her resolve was hardening into something stronger. Whoever was behind this wanted her to give up. They wanted her to crumble. But Naomi West didn't break that easily. If Ethan really was involved, she would find out. She would get to the truth and end this before anyone else got hurt. And if someone else was hiding in the shadows, Naomi would shine a light so bright they wouldn't be able to hide anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. Unknown. Number. Time's running out, Dr. West. Make your choice. Naomi's hands shook as she stared at the message. The words on the screen were a threat, but Naomi's fear was finally giving way to something else. Determination. Naomi sat in her car, the faint hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights in the parking lot seeping into the stillness. The text message still glowed on her phone's screen. Time's running out, Dr. West. Make your choice. Her hands gripped the wheel tightly, her breath steady but shallow. The words repeated in her mind like an incantation, quiet, threatening, designed to break her. Naomi glanced over her shoulder at the lot behind her. The rows of parked cars stretched out into the distance, half hidden in shadow. Her gaze landed on a black sedan near the back corner. It was parked under a broken streetlight, barely visible. Is it the same car? Naomi's chest tightened as she turned the key in the ignition. The engine growled to life, and she pulled out of the lot quickly. Her headlights carved a path through the darkness, but as she glanced in her rearview mirror, her stomach dropped. The black sedan pulled out, its headlights flicking on. They're following me. Naomi's heart pounded as she turned onto the main road, forcing herself to remain calm. She gripped the wheel, her knuckles white, as she took an unfamiliar route home, weaving through quiet streets. The sedan stayed several car lengths behind her, but it didn't stop. It was there, steady, deliberate. You need to stay in control. Naomi turned onto another street, this one darker than the rest, her mind racing through options. Then, as she passed a small gas station, an idea struck. She pulled in quickly, tires crunching on the gravel, and parked near the pumps. The sedan didn't follow. Instead, it continued down the road, its headlights disappearing into the distance. Naomi slumped forward, resting her forehead on the steering wheel, her breath ragged. They're watching me. She didn't know who they were yet, but the message was clear. They weren't going to stop until she quit. But she wouldn't quit. Naomi sat up straight, her resolve hardening like steel. When she arrived home, Marcus was waiting for her at the door. The porch light threw shadows across his face, but Naomi could still see the worry in his eyes. "You're late again," he said softly as she stepped inside. "Got held up," Naomi replied, forcing calm into her voice. Marcus closed the door behind her. "Naomi, what's going on?" Naomi hesitated, glancing toward the living room where Lily and Isaiah were playing on the floor. Their laughter cut through her tension, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Not here," she said quietly. Marcus followed her into the kitchen, where Naomi set down her bag and turned to face him. "Someone followed me tonight. The same black sedan from before." Marcus's expression darkened. "You need to call the police, Naomi. This has gone too far." "Not yet," Naomi said, shaking her head. "If I call the police, they might escalate. I don't know who's behind this, Marcus, and I can't trust anyone, not yet." "You don't have to do this alone," Marcus replied firmly, taking her hands in his. "You're not the only one fighting this battle." Naomi's throat tightened, and for a moment, the mask she had been wearing all day cracked. "I'm scared, Marcus," she admitted softly. "Whoever this is, they're inside the hospital. They're watching me. I don't know what they want or how far they're willing to go." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We'll figure this out. I promise you, no one is going to hurt this family." Naomi closed her eyes, leaning into him, drawing strength from his steady presence. The next day, Naomi returned to the hospital with a plan. She had spent the night going over every interaction, every suspicious glance, and every broken piece of equipment. Two names circled in her mind, Ethan Moore and Maya Bennett. Both had access, both had opportunity, but the motive still eluded her. Her first stop that morning was Maya's office. Naomi knocked sharply and entered without waiting for an answer. Maya looked up from her computer, her expression cool. "Dr. West, twice in 2 days, what a surprise." Naomi didn't waste time. "Did you report what you saw about Ethan being in the OR late at night?" Maya blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Report it? No, I didn't think it was serious." "Well, it is," Naomi said. "Someone tampered with the ventilator and a patient monitor. Lives are at risk, Maya." For the first time, Maya's sharp demeanor softened slightly. "Are you sure it was sabotage?" "Yes," Naomi replied firmly, "and whoever's behind it isn't going to stop." Maya sighed, leaning back in her chair. "If you think Ethan is involved, you should confront him. You two are close, aren't you?" Naomi's stomach turned. "I thought so." Ethan was in the doctor's lounge when Naomi found him. He was sitting on one of the worn leather couches, a medical journal opens in his lap. When Naomi entered, he glanced up and smiled, but the smile faltered when he saw the look on her face. "Naomi, you okay?" "We need to talk," Naomi said, her voice steady. Ethan sat up straighter. "Sure. What's going on?" Naomi hesitated for just a second before stepping closer. "Maya told me she saw you in the OR late at night last week. What were you doing there?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly, his expression shifting. "Maya said that?" "She did," Naomi replied. "So, what were you doing?" Ethan looked away for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I wasn't doing anything suspicious, Naomi. I was double-checking a few machines for an upcoming surgery. That's all?" "Why didn't you mention it to me?" "Because it wasn't important," Ethan replied quickly, meeting her gaze again. "You've been under a lot of stress lately. I didn't want to add to it." Naomi studied him, searching his face for any sign of deception. Ethan's expression was steady, but something about his words gnawed at her. "I need you to be honest with me, Ethan," Naomi said finally. "If you know anything about what's happening about the equipment failures, the threats tell me now." Ethan's face darkened. "You think I'm involved in this?" "I don't know what to think," Naomi said softly. "But someone is trying to destroy me, Ethan, and I need to find out who." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, hurt flashing across his face. "I thought we were friends, Naomi." "So did I," she replied quietly. Ethan stood abruptly, grabbing his journal and thermos. "You're wrong about me, Naomi, but I hope you figure this out before it's too late." She watched him walk out of the lounge, her stomach twisted in knots. Ethan had always been there for her, but now doubt lingered like a dark cloud. What if I'm pushing away the wrong people? By the time Naomi returned to her office, her head was throbbing. She dropped into her chair, pressing her hands to her temples. The paranoia, the uncertainty, it was all beginning to feel like too much. A soft knock broke through her thoughts. Naomi looked up to see Greg, the janitor, standing in the doorway with his familiar, quiet presence. "Sorry to bother you, Dr. West," he said gently, holding up a small envelope. "I found this outside your office door. Thought you should have it." Naomi frowned, taking the envelope. "Thank you, Greg." Greg nodded and left, his footsteps echoing softly down the hallway. Naomi turned the envelope over in her hands. There was no name, no handwriting, nothing to indicate who it was from. Her pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. Typed in bold letters were the words, "You're running out of time, Dr. West." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Whoever was doing this wasn't stopping. They were getting closer, and now they were right outside her door. She looked at the photo on her desk of Marcus, Lily, and Isaiah, her hands tightening into fists. Whoever you are, Naomi thought, I will stop you. You won't win. The walls around her might have felt like they were closing in, but Naomi refused to break. Whoever was hiding in the shadows would be brought into the light, and she wouldn't stop until she found them. The typed words on the note, "You're running out of time, Dr. West," clung to Naomi's mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. She sat frozen in her office, the faint buzz of the hospital outside her door, a cruel reminder that life continued moving while hers teetered on the brink. The message wasn't just a threat anymore, it was a countdown. Her family's smiling faces stared back at her from the photo on her desk. Marcus, Lily, Isaiah, the people she lived for. They were the reason she had built this life, sacrificed so much, and refused to give up. Naomi traced her fingers along the edge of the frame, determination settling in her chest like a stone. You won't win. I won't let you. By late afternoon, Naomi's nerves were frayed. Her usual confidence felt like a mask she had to keep adjusting. The staff seemed to sense her tension, casting her concerned glances as she moved through the halls. But no one knew the truth that Naomi was being hunted, inch, by someone she couldn't see. She pushed open the door to the staff lounge, craving a moment of quiet, only to find Maya Bennett sitting at the far end of the room with her head down. Papers were scattered in front of her, her expression tight. Naomi hesitated. The two women rarely shared personal conversations, but something in Maya's posture, her shoulders hunched, her hands clenched around a pen, made Naomi pause. She grabbed a cup of coffee, then sat across from her. Maya glanced up startled. "Oh, Naomi. You look about how I feel," Naomi said softly, attempting to lighten the mood. Maya smirked faintly but didn't reply. Naomi watched her for a moment, the silence growing heavy between them. Finally, Maya sighed and set her pen down. "Have you ever felt like someone's waiting for you to fail?" The question hung in the air, cutting deeper than Maya could have realized. "Yes," Naomi replied carefully. "More than I'd like to admit." Maya looked at her, something shifting in her gaze. "I thought it was just me. Lately it feels like someone's watching every move I make." Naomi's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Maya hesitated, as though debating how much to say. "I don't know. It's probably nothing. But last week, I found my surgical tray rearranged before a procedure tool's out of place, sutures missing. I told myself it was just a mistake, but now I'm not so sure." Naomi's stomach dropped. The pieces were starting to connect. Someone wasn't just targeting her, they were targeting the integrity of the hospital itself. "Why didn't you say anything?" Naomi asked. "Because if I'm wrong, I look paranoid," Maya replied bitterly. "And if I'm right—" She trailed off, shaking her head. Naomi leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "You're not imagining it, Maya. It's happening to me too." Maya stared at her, surprise flickering across her face. "What?" Naomi nodded. "It's more than one incident. The ventilator in my OR failed. A monitor flatlined when it shouldn't have. Someone's been tampering with the machines, and now they're leaving me threats." Maya's face paled. "Naomi, this is serious." "I know," Naomi said quietly. "I don't know who's behind it yet, but I need your help. You said you saw Ethan in the OR late at night. Do you think it could be him?" Maya hesitated, clearly conflicted. "I don't know. Ethan's always been dependable, but people can surprise you." Naomi leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. If Ethan wasn't the saboteur, someone was using him as a distraction. And if Maya was experiencing similar incidents, then this wasn't about Naomi alone. The person behind this wanted chaos, distrust, failure, and fear. Maya stood, gathering her papers. "If you're right, Naomi, we need to stop this before someone gets hurt." "We will," Naomi replied, her voice steady. "But we have to be careful. Until we know who's behind this, we can't trust anyone." Maya nodded sharply, then turned to leave. Naomi watched her go, a strange mixture of unease and relief settling over her. For the first time in days, she felt less alone. That night, Naomi arrived home to find Marcus pacing the living room. The kids were already in bed, their absence making the house feel eerily quiet. Marcus stopped when he saw her, his expression tense. "Naomi, we need to talk." She set her bag down slowly. "What's wrong?" Marcus picked up an envelope from the coffee table. It was identical to the one Naomi had found outside her office door. "This came in the mail today," Marcus said, holding it out. Naomi's hands shook as she took the envelope and opened it. Inside was another message, printed in the same bold, threatening font. "Last warning. Resign, or your family will suffer." Naomi sank onto the couch, the note falling from her hands. The walls felt like they were closing in. Marcus knelt in front of her, his hands firm on her shoulders. "This has gone far enough," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're calling the police tomorrow." "Marcus, no." "Yes," Marcus interrupted firmly. "This isn't just about you anymore, Naomi. It's about us, about Lily and Isaiah." Naomi closed her eyes, fighting back tears. He was right. Whoever was doing this wasn't backing down. They had come too close to her family. "Okay," she whispered finally. "We'll call the police." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Naomi let herself lean into him, exhaustion and fear spilling out in silent tears. She had fought so hard to keep this contained, but it was slipping through her fingers. The following morning, Naomi walked into the hospital with her head held high, but inside, her resolve was cracking. She had called the police first thing that morning. 2 detectives were scheduled to meet her later that afternoon to take her statement. Until then, Naomi needed to keep moving, keep working. She had a surgery scheduled, and no matter what else was happening, she owed her patients her focus. The OR was quiet when she arrived, the team preparing for a routine gallbladder removal. Naomi scrubbed in, taking slow, steady breaths as she focused on the task ahead. She pushed the threats and the paranoia to the edges of her mind. For now, she was a surgeon again. "Vitals stable, doctor," said Kelly, her trusted nurse, as Naomi began the procedure. "Good," Naomi replied, her hands steady as she worked. "Let's keep it that way." But then, the heart monitor began to beep erratically. Naomi froze. The screen flickered, the patient's oxygen levels plummeting. "Doctor!" Kelly shouted. Naomi's mind raced. "Bag the patient manually now." The nurse grabbed the ambu bag, squeezing air into the patient's lungs while Naomi scanned the equipment. The ventilator had failed again. "This is deliberate," Naomi muttered under her breath. Kelly looked up sharply. "What?" "Nothing," Naomi said quickly, her focus returning to the patient. "Stay with me, everyone. We'll get through this." Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, the ventilator restarted, and the patient's vitals stabilized. Naomi let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she stepped back. The OR was silent, the team exchanging uneasy glances. "Good work, everyone," Naomi said finally, her voice tight. "Let's close." As Naomi scrubbed out, her reflection in the mirror looked back at her pale, tired, but unbroken. Whoever was behind this had pushed her to the brink. But Naomi West wouldn't fall. That afternoon, 2 detectives sat in Naomi's office. One of them, Detective Rhodes, was tall and broad-shouldered with a no-nonsense air. "We'll launch a full investigation, Dr. West," he said, as Naomi recounted the threats and equipment failures. "If someone's targeting you, we'll find them." "Thank you," Naomi said quietly. As the detectives left, Naomi sat alone, staring at the empty doorway. She had finally taken the first step, exposing the darkness that had been stalking her. But as she looked at her phone and saw another text flash across the screen, too late. Naomi knew the worst was still to come. The text message, "Too late," burned into Naomi's mind like a brand. She sat alone in her office, the sterile glow of the hospital hallway filtering through the half-closed blinds. Her hands trembled as she set the phone on the desk, staring at the screen as if it might explain itself. Too late for what? The words unsettled her more than the others had. Before, the threats had been warnings, ultimatums dangling over her head. This felt final. The soft knock at her door startled her. Naomi sat up straight, quickly sliding the phone face down. "Come in." Detective Rhodes stepped inside, holding a small notepad. He was calm but serious, his no-nonsense demeanor unchanged. "Dr. West, we have something." Naomi's heart skipped. "What did you find?" Rhodes closed the door behind him, his tone low. "Your concerns were right. The maintenance logs you provided have been tampered with. Our team verified that several checks were either forged or never happened." Naomi swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. "Do you know who's responsible?" "We're narrowing it down," Rhodes said, flipping through his notepad. "But someone has been accessing hospital systems using a staff login. It's too early to say who yet, but whoever it is, they know how to cover their tracks." Naomi leaned back in her chair, processing the information. "How long has this been going on?" "At least a month," Rhodes replied. "The incidents align with your equipment failures. Whoever's doing this is targeting you, specifically using your reputation to cover their sabotage." Naomi felt a chill crawl up her spine. "How do you know it's me they're targeting?" Rhodes looked her square in the eye. "The threatening notes. Whoever's behind this wants you out, Dr. West, and they're getting desperate." The weight of his words pressed on her chest. Naomi thought of Marcus and the kids, their faces flaring in her mind like a protective shield. The threats weren't just about her, they were meant to dismantle everything she held dear. "What's our next step?" Naomi asked. "Be careful," Rhodes said firmly. "Don't confront anyone yourself. We're watching now, but you need to keep acting like you don't know what's happening. Let us do our job." Naomi nodded, though the thought of sitting back and waiting felt impossible. "Thank you, Detective." "Stay vigilant," Rhodes said before leaving, the door clicking shut softly behind him. By late afternoon, Naomi was moving through the hospital with her usual purpose, but her senses were sharper, her gaze more focused. Every hallway felt longer, every interaction more charged. Faces she had known for years, colleagues, nurses, even patients blurred into a collective sense of unease. She stopped at the nurse's station to check on her afternoon surgery, flipping through the pre-op chart. Kelly, her most trusted nurse, appeared beside her with a small smile. "Dr. West, everything's prepped for your next case," Kelly said, handing her the updated vitals. "Thanks, Kelly," Naomi replied, her voice steady. She glanced at the clock. "I'll scrub in soon." Kelly hesitated, her smile fading slightly. "You okay, doctor? You've been quieter than usual." Naomi looked at her, surprised by the question. "I'm fine, just a lot on my mind." "You know," Kelly said softly, "we all trust you here. I don't know what's going on, but you've gotten us through worse. If you need anything, just say the word." The unexpected kindness caught Naomi off guard. She met Kelly's gaze, seeing nothing but sincerity. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." Kelly gave her a small nod before stepping away to assist another doctor. Naomi exhaled slowly, her shoulders softening. Not everyone is the enemy. Naomi's afternoon surgery was a routine gallbladder removal, and the procedure started smoothly. The OR was calm, the team moving in sync as Naomi led them with quiet authority. "Clamp here," Naomi instructed, her focus unwavering. But as she reached for the next tool, her hand froze mid-air. Something wasn't right. The scalpel on her tray, her preferred blade, had been swapped for a duller version. It wasn't enough to stop the surgery, but it was deliberate. "Kelly," Naomi said tightly, her voice low so only she could hear, "did you prep the tools today?" "Yes, doctor," Kelly replied, her brow furrowing. Everything was triple-checked. Naomi's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "It's fine. Pass me another scalpel." Kelly quickly handed her a sharper blade, and Naomi resumed the procedure without missing a beat. But inside, her mind was spinning. Whoever this is, they're close. After the surgery, Naomi made her way to the maintenance room. She knew it was a long shot, but she couldn't sit back and do nothing. She needed answers. The room smelled faintly of metal and cleaning supplies, its shelves stacked with tools, spare monitors, and cables. A large maintenance log sat open on the work table, its pages scrawled with handwritten notes. Naomi flipped through the recent entries, searching for anything unusual. Dates were missing. Signatures were inconsistent. Her heart pounded as she scanned the list of staff members who had logged entries. Then she froze. A familiar name stared back at her: Ethan Moore. Her pulse quickened. Ethan's name had appeared multiple times over the past month, signed beside equipment Naomi knew had failed during her surgeries. The door creaked behind her, and Naomi spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tall frame backlit by the dim hallway light. "Naomi," he said, his voice even but laced with tension. "What are you doing here?" Naomi's mind raced as she carefully closed the maintenance log. "Just checking some records." Ethan stepped further into the room, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Naomi forced herself to meet his gaze. "Because someone's tampering with the equipment, Ethan. And I need to know who." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You think it's me?" Naomi swallowed, her voice calm despite the storm inside her. "Your name is on the logs, Ethan. You were in the OR late at night. Help me understand why." Ethan stepped closer, his movements deliberate but not threatening. His voice dropped low. "Naomi, you're making a mistake." "Then tell me I'm wrong," Naomi pressed, her throat dry. "Tell me what's going on." For a moment, Ethan looked as though he might say something, but then he turned abruptly, his face hardening. "You need to stop this, Naomi. You're only going to make it worse." Naomi stared at him, her chest tight with a mix of anger and betrayal. "Worse for who?" Ethan didn't answer. He left the room, the door closing with a soft thud that echoed through the quiet. That evening, Naomi sat at the kitchen table, the house dark except for the faint light above her. Marcus was upstairs putting the kids to bed. In front of her lay the photocopy of the log with Ethan's name on it. She stared at it, her mind a tangle of questions. Why, Ethan? Her phone buzzed. Naomi grabbed it quickly, her pulse spiking. It was another text message from the unknown number. "You're so close, Dr. West, but it's too late to turn back now." Naomi's hands trembled as she set the phone down. A cold, sinking feeling spread through her chest. The pieces were coming together, but the closer she got to the truth, the darker it became. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression tired. "Naomi, come to bed. You need rest." Naomi looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Someone I trusted might be behind this." Marcus frowned, stepping toward her. "Who?" Naomi's eyes fell to the maintenance log. "Ethan." Marcus stared at her, his face unreadable. "You're sure?" "I don't know," Naomi admitted. "But I have to find out. I'm running out of time." Naomi lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Marcus slept soundly beside her. Outside, the faint hum of the streetlights and the occasional rustle of leaves filled the silence. But inside her mind, there was only noise, a whirl of doubts, accusations, and fears. Ethan. His name was in the logs. The thought clung to her like a shadow. He had been her friend, her confidant for years. Could it all have been a lie? Or was someone setting him up? The confrontation in the maintenance room replayed in her mind. The way Ethan's expression hardened, his words deliberate, "You're only going to make it worse." Her phone sat on the nightstand. Naomi grabbed it, scrolling through the messages she had received. "Resign or your family will suffer. Too late. You're so close, Dr. West. Her thumb hovered over the screen as she thought of texting Ethan, but she stopped herself. If he was behind this, confronting him could make things worse. And if he wasn't, Naomi didn't know who she could trust anymore. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the hospital with a grim determination. The sterile hallways, so familiar for years, felt like they were closing in on her. As she passed her colleagues, Naomi scanned their faces, wondering who was hiding behind a mask of professionalism. Her first surgery of the day was a complex heart bypass. Naomi scrubbed in silently, her thoughts sharp and focused as she went over the procedure in her mind. Kelly, her trusted nurse, was waiting for her inside the OR, as calm as ever. "Everything's prepped, doctor," Kelly said softly, handing Naomi the sterile gloves. "Thank you," Naomi replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The patient lay on the table, draped and prepped, monitors beeping rhythmically. Naomi forced herself to focus. She had done this surgery countless times. This was her domain, where she was in control. "Scalpel?" she said, extending her hand. Kelly passed it to her, and Naomi began. The familiar rhythm of the OR wrapped around her like armor, steady breathing, quiet murmurs from the surgical team, the hum of the machines. It was here, in the eye of the storm, that Naomi could think clearly. But 10 minutes in, something changed. A sharp beep rang out from the heart monitor. Naomi's eyes darted to the screen. The patient's blood pressure was dropping fast. "What's happening?" Naomi asked sharply. The anesthesiologist spoke up. "A BP's crashing. I can't stabilize it." Naomi's mind raced. "Check the IV line. Is there a blockage?" "It's clear, doctor," Kelly said, her voice rising slightly in alarm. The heart monitor's beeps quickened, signaling arrhythmia. Naomi's hands tightened around her tools. "Get me the crash cart now!" A nurse wheeled the cart to her side as Naomi fought to keep the procedure under control. She glanced at the equipment. Everything appeared functional, but something felt wrong, deliberately wrong. "Prepare to defibrillate," Naomi instructed. "Charging to 200. Clear." The team stepped back as Naomi pressed the paddles to the patient's chest. The body jerked slightly, but the rhythm on the monitor remained unstable. Again, charged to 300. The room felt suffocating, every second stretching endlessly. Naomi's heart pounded as she repeated the process. "Stay with me." On the third attempt, the monitor finally stabilized. The erratic beeps slowed to a steady rhythm. Naomi exhaled sharply, her hands trembling with adrenaline as she handed off the paddles. "Vitals stabilizing," the anesthesiologist said. Naomi nodded, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Let's finish this. We're not losing anyone today." The OR team moved like clockwork as Naomi completed the procedure. By the time they closed the patient, the monitors hummed softly, as if nothing had happened. Naomi stepped back from the table, her scrubs damp with sweat. Her chest heaved as the weight of what had just occurred settled over her. She turned to Kelly, who was pale but calm. "Kelly," Naomi said quietly, "I need you to check that equipment. Every piece of it. Now." Kelly nodded. "Yes, doctor." Naomi scrubbed out in silence, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her expression harder than she'd ever seen it. She dried her hands and turned to leave the scrub room, only to find Detective Rhodes waiting for her in the hallway. "I heard there was a scare in the OR," Rhodes said, his brow furrowed. "What happened?" "The heart monitor and IV were fine on the surface, but the blood pressure plummeted anyway," Naomi said bitterly. "It wasn't equipment failure, Detective. This was sabotage." Rhodes exhaled slowly, his face darkening. "Do you have any idea who might be responsible?" Naomi hesitated. "Ethan's name keeps coming up in the logs. Maya saw him in the OR after hours." Rhodes narrowed his eyes. "Dr. Moore?" "I don't want to believe it," Naomi admitted, her voice heavy. "But it's a lead we can't ignore." Rhodes nodded, scribbling something into his notebook. "We're working on tracing the logins. If Ethan is involved, we'll find out." Naomi swallowed hard, guilt twisting in her stomach. Ethan had been her friend for years, her closest ally in this hospital. Could she really have been so wrong about him? By evening, Naomi drove home in silence. The black sedan she had seen before was nowhere in sight, but her paranoia remained. Every headlight in her rearview mirror felt like a threat. When she walked through the door, Marcus was waiting in the living room, pacing anxiously. "What happened today?" he asked the moment she stepped inside. Naomi dropped her bag on the table, her shoulders slumping. "Another incident. Someone tampered with the equipment again. I almost lost a patient." Marcus's face hardened. "Naomi, this has to stop. You can't keep going like this." "I know," Naomi whispered, the exhaustion in her voice clear. "The police are closing in, but I don't know how much longer I can hold this together." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "We'll get through this. You'll figure it out." Naomi closed her eyes, tears prickling behind her lids. Marcus's steady presence grounded her, but deep inside, the walls felt like they were closing in. Later that night, Naomi sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scrolling through patient files and incident reports. She wasn't just looking for patterns anymore. She was hunting for something, anything, that would tie all of this together. Her phone buzzed beside her. Another text messages. "Tomorrow will change everything." Naomi's hand shook as she stared at the words. Whoever this was, they were planning something big. Her mind went to Ethan, to Maya, to the faces of her team in the OR. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered, but Naomi could feel the truth just beyond her reach. Tomorrow she would find it, or lose everything trying. Naomi couldn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, the faint glow of her phone screen casting sharp lines across her face. The text, "Tomorrow will change everything," played over and over in her mind, like a warning she couldn't escape. Marcus stirred beside her. "Naomi," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Come to bed." "I can't," she whispered. Marcus sat up, his silhouette visible against the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. "It's happening again, isn't it?" Naomi nodded, her throat tight. "They sent another message. Something's going to happen tomorrow, Marcus. I know it." Marcus reached for her hand, his grip firm and steady. "Then you'll be ready for it. Whoever this is, they've underestimated you, Naomi." Naomi met his eyes, and for a moment, her fear gave way to the smallest flicker of strength. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been reacting, letting them control this. Tomorrow, I'm taking it back." The morning arrived gray and heavy, the clouds outside the hospital threatening rain. Naomi walked through the doors of Parkside Medical Center with a calm, deliberate resolve. She knew something was coming, and whoever was behind this wasn't going to catch her off guard. Her first stop was the nurse's station. Kelly greeted her with her usual steady smile, though Naomi noticed the faint shadow of concern in her expression. "Morning, Dr. West. The first case is prepped, and I triple-checked the equipment myself." "Thank you, Kelly," Naomi said softly. "I trust you." Kelly paused, then leaned in slightly. "You're going to get through this, Doctor. I know it." Naomi nodded, the words anchoring her as she turned and headed for the OR. The procedure was a delicate heart valve replacement. Naomi scrubbed in, methodically preparing herself. The OR buzzed with quiet efficiency as the team assembled. Kelly stood ready by her side, and Ethan arrived moments later, adjusting his gloves with his usual calm demeanor. "Morning, Naomi," he said, his voice neutral. Naomi looked at him for a beat longer than usual, searching his face. Ethan had been her ally, her friend, but doubt still gnawed at her. Was he part of this? Or was someone setting him up? "Morning," she replied evenly, turning back to focus on the patient. The surgery began smoothly. Naomi moved with the precision she was known for, every motion deliberate and controlled. Her team followed her lead flawlessly, the rhythm of the room steady and sure. For a while, Naomi let herself slip into that focused place where the outside world ceased to exist. Then it happened. The heart monitor flatlined. "Vitals crashing?" Kelly called, panic creeping into her voice. Naomi's head snapped up, her pulse spiking. "Check the leads. Bag the patient manually now." Kelly moved quickly, grabbing the ambu bag, while Naomi scanned the equipment. Her gaze landed on the heart-lung machine. It was off. The backup system, designed to keep the patient alive during heart surgery, had been disabled. "This isn't a malfunction," Naomi said tightly. "Someone turned it off." Ethan froze. "What? Are you sure?" Naomi's voice was cold and sharp. "I'm sure. Get it back online. Now." Ethan moved quickly to reset the machine, his movements frantic but controlled. Naomi stayed at the patient's side, her mind a battlefield of anger and determination. "Not today. You're not taking this one." The machine flickered back to life, and the heart monitor began to beep steadily again. Naomi exhaled, her hands steady as she resumed the procedure. "Vitals stabilizing," Kelly said, her voice filled with relief. Naomi didn't respond. She was already 2 steps ahead, her mind piecing it all together. Someone had tried to sabotage this surgery, and they had failed. When the procedure was complete and the patient was stable, Naomi scrubbed out quickly, the adrenaline still pounding through her veins. Outside the OR, she found Detective Rhodes waiting, his expression serious. "You need to see this," he said quietly, motioning for her to follow. Rhodes led Naomi to a small room near the hospital's security office. Inside, several monitors displayed footage from the OR and hallways. Rhodes pointed to one of the screens. "Watch this." The footage showed the OR preparation from earlier that morning. As the surgical team set up, a shadow appeared on the edge of the frame, a man in scrubs with his face partially obscured. He approached the heart-lung machine, fiddled with it for a few seconds, then disappeared. Naomi leaned closer. "Can you identify him?" Rhodes zoomed in, enhancing the image. Naomi's breath caught in her throat as the man's face became clear. It was Charles Reardon, a hospital board member who had overseen budgets and equipment purchases for years. Naomi's mind raced. Charles had always been distant, a shadowy presence at Parkside's highest levels, but she had never interacted with him directly. Why would he do this? Rhodes folded his arms. "We found evidence that Reardon's been manipulating hospital finances. He's been funneling money from maintenance and equipment budgets into personal accounts. If you resigned, it would have given him cover someone else to blame when everything came crashing down." Naomi's pulse quickened. "He tried to destroy my career to save himself." "Not just your career," Rhodes said darkly. "Your life." Hours later, Naomi stood outside Reardon's hospital room. The man had suffered a sudden heart attack in his office. Poetic justice, Naomi thought grimly, for someone who had endangered so many lives. The irony was not lost on her that she had been called to perform his emergency surgery. She stepped into the room, her presence filling the quiet space. Reardon lay in the bed, pale and weak, his eyes fluttering open at the sound of her footsteps. "You," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "Yes," Naomi replied calmly. "I saved your life today." Reardon's expression flickered shame, anger, fear all buried beneath his exhaustion. Naomi stood over him, her voice low but steady. "You tried to ruin me. You threatened my family. And now you're here, alive, because of me." Reardon turned his head away, unable to look at her. "I'm not the one who's broken here, Mr. Reardon," Naomi continued. "You are, but I'll make sure you can't hurt anyone else again." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him to his silence. The following week, the storm that had hovered over Naomi's life began to lift. Charles Reardon's crimes made headlines. His arrest sent shockwaves through the hospital. But for Naomi, It was closure. As she walked down the hospital hallways, colleagues stopped to shake her hand, their faces filled with admiration. "You showed real courage, Dr. West," Maya told her one afternoon, a rare smile softening her sharp features. "I'm glad you stayed." Naomi nodded, the weight that had pressed on her shoulders finally lifting. "Me too." Later that evening, Naomi drove home, the familiar streets bathed in the golden glow of sunset. When she walked through the front door, Lily and Isaiah ran to greet her, their laughter filling the house like music. Marcus was in the kitchen, cooking dinner, his smile warm and steady as ever. "Mom!" Lily shouted. "You're home early." Naomi knelt and hugged both kids tightly, her heart full. "I'm home," she whispered. Marcus came to her side, pressing a kiss to her temple. "It's over, isn't it?" Naomi smiled faintly, looking around at her family, her sanctuary. "Yes, it's over." For the first time in weeks, Naomi let herself breathe deeply. The storm had passed, leaving her stronger, more grounded, and more grateful than ever. Sometimes, the darkness revealed the brightest light, not in the absence of fear, but in the strength to face it head-on. Naomi had faced her enemy, saved lives, and protected her family. She had proven to herself and to the world that no shadow could silence her resolve. And as the house filled with the smell of dinner and the sound of her children's laughter, Naomi knew she had won. Weeks later, the hospital hummed with a different energy, one of recovery and renewal. Naomi stood outside Parkside Medical Center, sunlight warming her face as she looked up at the building that had tested her strength more than she could have imagined. Inside, life carried on. Her patients, her colleagues, and the hum of machines continued as they always had. But something had changed. Naomi herself had changed. As she walked into the lobby, nurses and staff greeted her with nods of admiration. Maya waved from the nurses' station, her usual cool demeanor softened by respect. Kelly smiled brightly as Naomi passed, and Ethan, cleared of suspicion, met her in the hallway with a quiet apology and a handshake. "Glad to have you back," he said simply. "Good to be back," Naomi replied. In her office, Naomi placed the photo of her family back on her desk. She studied the smiles of Marcus, Lily, and Isaiah, and for the first time in months, she felt a deep, abiding peace. The storm had come and gone, but she was still standing stronger than ever. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dinner's at 6. Don't be late." Naomi grinned and tucked the phone into her pocket. There would be more challenges ahead, but for now, she had earned this moment of calm. She walked back into the heart of the hospital, her second home, ready for whatever came next. Thank you for joining Naomi's journey of perseverance, hope, and resilience. If you enjoyed this story and want more tales that inspire, challenge, and captivate, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Together, we'll keep bringing you stories of courage, kindness, and the power of never giving up. Subscribe now and stay tuned for the next story.